So welcome everyone. We're back for another exciting interview. This time it's with Scott Onstott. And let me read his bio and then we'll get into it. So Scott Onstott is the creator of Secrets in Plain Sight video series and inspiring exploration of great art, architecture, urban design, unveiling the unlikely intersection of geometry, mysticism, physics, music, astronomy, and world history. Secrets in Plain Sight has been seen by more than 3 million. I know that's more than that because I saw 11 million at another site.
Yeah, that's a pretty old bio, but that's all right. It still summarizes.
Okay, but we know it's many more millions. He's also the author of 11. Are we still at 11?
Actually, I think it's 24 now.
20. Wow, this is brilliant. Well, this is good. We're getting it up to date. Okay. He's the author of 24 technical books on architectural software and more books on esoteric subjects. Scott just published Quantification, a book on his thought-provoking color illustrations. Examines patterns in the Great Pyramid, in the human body, in the earth, and reveals uncanny distances between sacred sites. He has a degree in architecture and worked designing corporate interiors for a decade in San Francisco before becoming an independent teacher, author, and filmmaker. And he's got an incredible site now on sacred geometry with different videos and classes. And I didn't realize it was such a dated bio, but
that's okay.
Bring this up to date.
That
so
bio. So
Scott.
that bio was probably written shortly after I made Secrets in Plain Sight, the documentary series that came out in 2010. So it's been more than a decade since then.
Well, I watched it when it came out because everybody was talking about it. It was like something no one else had done. And so I remember it. Now I'm going back and reviewing it, and having spent all these years in my invisible architecture and all this, it's just like amazing. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad it's kind of still blowing people's minds, 11 years later.
Like how our ancestors had so much wisdom is just, you know what I mean? Like you just can't, we couldn't even replicate like the Great Pyramid and all of that now,
Yeah, exactly. It's got so much encoded in there, and we're just kind of the more open-minded among us are discovering the many layers of encoding that it has for us. And It's kind of like we have to get up to close to the same speed they were going back then when they built that thing to even appreciate it.
Right.
Otherwise, we just take it as a tomb or something when it's actually a mathematical monument.
It encodes everything. I mean, it has layers and layers and layers of
that's right. And it's not just that that's one of the most amazing structures in the world, the Great Pyramid. But in my Secrets in Plain Sight documentary, I go all over the world and look at cities and uncover these patterns which are right there, and that's the title, In Plain Sight, but that you may not have noticed before or really thought much about.
Well, I love how it goes with Angkor Wat and then all the way over to the pyramids in South America. I mean, and they're all aligned.
Well, certain things are. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that. I've been making more stuff since then. I've written a bunch of books on the subject, and I did one on Leonardo da Vinci. I did one on the golden ratio and the divine proportion. My latest book is on philosophy, and the philosophy of sacred geometry, and it kind of gets into modern idealism. And
well, I got that one. I really liked it because it updated, and I also have your calipers.
Oh wow!
so you can measure. And I was going to show you, like from way back, I had these.
Oh yeah.
The really old ones, and then people stopped making them. So because this is so big, so I was so excited when I saw the one you had made that measures 5.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a appropriate size for the desktop. That other one might be good if you were doing a sculpture or something, or painting.
Yeah.
Large.
Well, I had this friend, Dr. Mo, we used to call him, and he made them life size. And then he built like some houses, just giving his workers those to do all the measurements.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it was pretty good. So what I found interesting, like maybe you can go into, is like, how did you, it looks like you would pick two sacred sites, and then as you kept investigating, there would be something in the middle linking them, or there would be, you would discover more. How did you go about it? Or was it intuitive? Or
It, it was in my intuition that was guided by the precision of Google Earth, in that regard. I get a feeling, for example, if you draw a line from this ancient Egyptian temple in Madrid that was moved to Madrid when they built the Aswan Dam in the 60s, if you connect that with the ancient Egyptian obelisk in Istanbul in the city center, that line happens to go right over the ancient Egyptian obelisk in Rome, in front of the Lateran Palace where the popes lived for like 1,000 years. Wow. So it's really amazing. And so there's this Egyptian level, right? That's how I would find that. And then, but there's also the Roman level, because all three of those cities were initially Roman.
Oh, I see.
And so it's fascinating. Like, I don't really think that the Romans, located these cities, Madrid and, Byzantium was predating Rome.
Right.
So what did they locate Rome in respect to that? No, it's beyond our kind of conspiracy level thinking of people premeditating this. But nevertheless, the pattern is there. And so you start to speculate about, well, how did that happen? And it's certainly, it's too precise to be like, it boggles the mind that it would be
Right.
so accurate, The Earth is a big place,
Exactly.
It's hard to get three really culturally significant sites all in a line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just kept finding you'd have it, and then you just look and there would be something else there, and it could be even from another era, another time, like.
Yeah.
Days.
Well, there's another one that I found that which is the what is it called? Cleopatra's Needle in London. So it used to be in Alexandria for I don't know, 2,000 years before it was moved from it where it initially stood in Heliopolis. Well, if you measure where it was in Alexandria on the harbor wall, like really close to the Library of Alexandria, or the modern Library of Alexandria, to where it is now, it's 3,333.3 kilometers.
Wow, that magic number.
Yeah, and it's like, whoa, that certainly, it's another example of that, where I don't believe that there was some kind of conspiracy to move it exactly that far. And I don't think that in the 19th century, when they moved it, that they would be able to accurately measure the Earth to such a degree,
Isn't that related to the one in Central Park that they moved? I remember the Dixon from the his relatives and his forebears had been the Mason-Dixon line. So the one in Central Park in New York also was moved at that same time. He wrote a book about it.
I'm not familiar with that. I've heard of the Mason-Dixon line. I'm not sure where that is, but
I've written extensively on the Mason-Dixon line. It's the 39th parallel. Okay. And what's interesting about it, Washington, D.C. is on it. Beijing is on it. The Bohemian Grove is like almost there. Mount Ararat is on it. And you just go, I have like over 120 different, in Denver, our continuity government is on it. Everything on this 39th parallel. But it reminded me when you talked about the one in England, like about that one. Yeah. I mean, they're connected, but they have the same name. And I think that those two obelisks originally were from Heliopolis, and they stood as a pair there, outside of the temple there. But it's kind of amazing how these things happen. And I
look at the example of mound building termites,
Mhm.
as a kind of a metaphor for what might be going on with humans. In that, if you look at these amazing creatures, these little ants that build these mounds, the mounds actually can persist for more than 1,000 years. They found really old ones, and obviously that's far longer than the life cycle of the whole colony.
Right.
And they have elaborate structures of farming and air conditioning and structural supports, and it's amazing what they built.
Really?
Yeah, there's a
Wow.
National Geographic article all about it. It's fascinating. But then you think, well, how could the little ant mind has got to be the size of a grain of sand or something?
Right.
And is there one ant that plans it all out? I mean, that seems preposterous. So I start to wonder if there isn't a higher order
Mhm.
mind that is organizing the activities of all of the ants over many years to build this kind of structure that even increases the fertility of the land around it. I mean, it's incredible. And so, like humans, we make these alignments and we set these things up, and yet we're kind of like the ants in that we're not aware of it.
Mhm.
Individually, we play our part, but there's a deeper plan that's being laid out. And I
It's sort
find
of
that
like Rupert
fascinating.
Sheldrake has spoken about that in the morphogenic field kind of concept, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of like a species mind is what I'm kind of aiming at.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it could also
Are
be,
these termites around the world, or are they more
no,
in certain
they're a
areas?
specific kind of termite that builds these mounds. They're called, I think they're just called termite mound building ants. So
Oh,
I don't know the species name.
oh yeah. But I just wondered if they're in Africa or America or where, or they're
I
worldwide.
know they're in Africa. I don't know
Okay.
where else they might be.
Okay.
Yeah, but
That's amazing.
I wonder if also there's the theory of Gaia. That the Earth might
Mm-hmm.
be a self-regulating organism that optimizes itself for life,
Mm-hmm.
to support life. Because when you start looking at the kind of knife edge that we're resting on here, you know,
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's in physics that's called fine tuning. Like apparently there had to be all these different constants of physics that had to be very precisely tuned
Mm-hmm.
in order to even have like atoms other than hydrogen, or to have like the possibility of having a planet like ours. And I think that's really amazing, and that we're kind of missing, a lot of us are missing that, the wonder of that, of the fact that the improbability of our existence here is, it's really, we've won the cosmic lottery,
Right.
you know.
And I think it goes back, before we got into all of the, Newton and Newtonian and all of this stuff. Like if we go back to the philosophers of nature, like Goethe and all of them, I mean, they had that worldview that the Earth was a living entity, just like all the planets.
Yeah, and I agree with that. In my book on philosophy, I talk about how the universe is a universe of mind. There's consciousness is the ground of being. This is something that has been known for thousands of years, but
Right.
it's really true, folks. And that consciousness necessarily, or just out of its own desire to have a fuller experience,
Mhm.
optimizes everything for more interesting outcomes. So that would explain why we have fine tuning, why we have this wonderful universe that required an incredible precision of all the different constants to make it happen.
Mhm.
And the reason is because it's guided by intelligence. It's
Right.
guided by consciousness. It's not the random, dumb, inanimate universe
Mhm.
that we're told that to believe in college and so on.
Right.
You know, that philosophy has been helpful for our species to separate ourselves from the kind of stranglehold that religion once had in the West over
Mhm.
thought,
Mhm.
to separate science from religion. It's a very important step. But
Mhm.
I think that we threw too much out there. We threw the baby out with the bathwater, in
Mhm.
that we decided to stop looking at things that we couldn't weigh and measure, and say anything that we can't weigh and measure is going to be the domain of religion. Well, I think that reality is just too interesting. There's a lot of things that we can't weigh or measure
Right.
that are part of what we should investigate through the lens of science. And in fact, scientists themselves come up with things like dark matter and dark energy that you can't weigh or measure, that we're supposed to believe in. That's 95% of the total mass energy of the universe is supposed to be
Right.
something that we can't even weigh or measure.
Right.
So, there's something interesting going on there, folks, in that 95% that we can't
But
even
I just think,
investigate.
it's just the science got more rigid, the religion got more rigid. We're so in a dualistic point. I mean, you're either, in politics, you're this or you're that. Everybody's labeled. And I mean, I'm really like in your books and that I've been on this whole thing of it's not either or, it's both and.
Yeah, exactly. Another way is looking at everyone has some partial truth that they're holding on to. And even though you might disagree with them politically, let's say, they have some points that must be valid because they themselves are part of that camp. And they must be there for some reason. And you're in your camp and you're there for your reasons. But if all is consciousness, then you are those people too, ultimately. So I don't know what benefit it has in driving such a wedge between us to say that, you guys think that way, we think this way, when actually they're all just different valid viewpoints that people take.
Right.
And I think that's kind of more of an integral approach of looking at it from a higher level that you can only really get to once you realize that your point of view that you hold politically is just one point of view. There are other points of view that address different problems that we have in society. And I think a more cohesive view would be some way to try to integrate and synthesize these points of view into some kind of greater whole.
But people have a really hard time at this moment in life of doing that. I mean, like you could just keep saying both and this and then people just, I don't know, they say you've changed, you don't see it the same way. Well, you don't. You see things larger, and what's more and what is important also.
That's right. And as we contemplate our own personal death, we look for things that are larger than us, that and religion has traditionally been a comfort there. But I'm such a wide-ranging thinker that I'm never been satisfied with a simple explanation that was given to me in my early years as a Christian. And so I've expanded that to include in my life all religions and all philosophies, and it's kind of an all and kind of approach that I take. But I recognize that I'm very unusual in that regard.
But I mean, you see that your take by how you find all of these interconnections just through the architecture and everything worldwide,
Yeah, it's just one of the many doors into the great mystery, and it's a fascinating one that I happen to take. But there are many other roads that lead up to the mountain, and basically you can just go follow your interest, whatever that is. And eventually, if you follow it far enough, you'll get into the same mysteries that I found on my path that ultimately kind of all point to consciousness. You see, I believe that there's an inward path of the mystic that ultimately leads to consciousness. And there's an outward path of the scientist who measures the world and tries to understand outside of them. And that also leads to consciousness in the end. And so we meet in the middle. We have a common point of understanding there, ultimately. And so it doesn't really matter which direction you go in, as long as you're dedicated to your path.
Right.
Don't just kind of stay in the lobby, but go somewhere,
Exactly. And that, I mean, and like society at the moment is so trying to make everyone the same and right, like with all these different mandates from wokeism to everything they're trying to make, what I mean? And it's just over the top at a point, like to get out to that.
Yeah. I don't like that that force of trying to homogenize everyone.
Homogenize, that's
Yeah, I don't like that feeling. I think it's more powerful to support diversity, to encourage that. It's kind of like a monoculture that they're advocating. They're like, oh, we can grow the corn, we can have vigorous corn growth in this field if we
all the same height.
All the same height if we use chemicals and we do this and that, and we'll get it all the same. Yeah, we'll have a lot of output from the field, but we actually put ourselves in a real dangerous situation, because what if there is a new pathogen that comes and attacks that particular only kind of corn that exists now? There's a strength in diversity and having all kinds of different kinds of corn, say, that grow it organically, and maybe you don't get quite the same output, but you have much more resistance to changing conditions.
I just had this thing, but like the president of Mexico is taking back all the corn because they're going to redo all their diversity. So he's like not going to allow any GMO and do it. So it's little doorways like that opening around. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's on a philosophical level, it's better to support different projects and have a diversity of human experiences and have a wide variety of things going on, and try to encourage that rather than just shut it down and have one way of thinking. It's very totalitarian, isn't it? To have one way of being and one way of thinking, and certain words that you can't say and certain thoughts that you're not allowed to have, and so on. And
pronoun that you are.
Yeah. I guess I'm kind of a product of my culture growing up on the West Coast and being very individualistic and appreciating that. And I know that if I had grown up in, let's say, another place where it was much more about tradition and conformity and team playing and all that, then I would have a different outlook. So, but I think that there's strength in that approach too.
Exactly. You need the balance.
Yeah. It's more about balance.
It is. Oh, it's just so like we're just so in a transition time at the moment, when I was looking at, like, because I'm in LA, you're in Canada. I was looking at you had done like a write-up. You did some. Can you give some of the stuff you discovered in LA? I know you about the Hollywood sign and those gates in Hollywood, the Ishtar, I think.
Yeah. So I found this weird alignment between the original Babylon, and the structures there, which happened to be
really over in Babylon.
Really over in Iraq,
Yeah, but I mean, okay.
And then I drew a line from that Ishtar gate, and it goes along this prominent wall, the kind of primary processional way there, the main avenue, if you like.
To the Ishtar wall, the Ishtar wall in
well, there's an Ishtar gate. Okay, and it's right along. It's like on the corner of the complex, and then it goes straight. It goes right along this kind of processional way along and the wall goes along that edge. The city wall goes right along that edge.
Okay.
And if I drew a line from there, and I was just curious, like, where does that go? If it goes anywhere, why was it going that way? And if I remember right, it's kind of to the northwest.
Okay.
Like, okay. So I drew that line all the way around the world. And I'm like, does it hit anything? I'm like, oh, it hits Los Angeles, like, okay. So I zoom in, and I'm like, I find out there's an Ishtar gate at Hollywood and Highland.
Oh, wow. I didn't. Oh, that's so good.
Have you been there?
Yes. Well, only once. It's a place one doesn't really want to go.
Yeah. There's all those like superhero people in costumes.
Exactly, the costume.
Yeah, and it's like where they have the Academy Awards show. And anyway, there's a replica gate there.
Right, I know that.
Ishtar gate, and so it goes right there, and I'm just like, mind boggled, like, oh my God.
Wow.
And I thought that was odd that they built out that complex there.
Yeah.
With all that, Babylonian symbolism, And apparently it was because it's in honor of this movie that came out in the early 20th century called Intolerance. And it was made by this director who also made a movie about the KKK, which I thought was very insensitive of the builders of that to be making, this thing in homage to this kind of very dubious filmmaker,
Wow.
in my opinion. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that they did it, and now it's just there, and nobody thinks about it.
But what I remember is you looked through it and saw the Hollywood sign.
Yeah, exactly. You stand there at the gate,
I'm going to go there because I haven't done that yet.
They actually have telescopes that you put a quarter in or whatever.
At the gate?
At the gate, and you can look right up at the sign.
Oh my God. It's just so amazing. And did you find anything else interesting in
I drew a line, I think it was from there to the end of the Santa Monica Pier, because that's the historical end of the Mother Road, Route 66. And so it goes all the way from Chicago to LA, and it ends there. And that line from the Ishtar Gate to the pier happens to go right over what is it called? CAA, Creative Artists Association in Century City, which is kind of like the financial capital of Hollywood, where the agents are, and it's like where all the deals get made. And then when you look at that complex, it's incredible. It looks like a all-seeing eye with a compass and square and a fountain that's like the pyramidion on top of the pyramid. And it has these two towers that were made by Yamasaki, the same architect who designed the Twin Towers in New York City.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but these aren't square; these are triangles, and so they have this symbolism of the two triangles coming together, of like fire and water, and it has this kind of interesting tension there. And it's really a complex that's got lots of secrets in plain sight built into it. I think there, 44 floors in each building. You add them together, you get 88, and there are 88 constellations in the sky that astronomers recognize. And it's on Constellation Boulevard and Avenue of the Stars.
It keeps going.
Yeah, it's just wow. It's just full of encodings there, and I'm just blown away. And the reason I even discovered that or noticed it myself was because of that alignment. It went right over it. And I'm like, what is this thing? I'm like,
I have to go look at it. I haven't been there yet.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know that Highway 66 went to the end of the Santa Monica Pier. Yeah,
there's actually a sign kind of right at the beginning of the pier that says end of the road, and it has 66 on it. And then on the other end of that highway, it ends at the Buckingham Fountain in Grant Park, Chicago. And what's amazing about that park is that its design is based on a 512 rectangle, much like the Tuileries Garden is in France, in Paris. And I've done a lot of work on that. And some of that's in my Secrets in Plain Sight film. But if you measure the distance from the Buckingham Fountain to the round fountain in Paris, in that park, I think it's 6,666.6 kilometers.
Tell these numbers.
Yeah, and it's like,
also very Masonic.
All the sixes,
Well, when you in the occult, when you go 666, in the magic squares and that's the number of the sun.
That's right. Yeah, the magic square of the sun is a 6x6 grid, and all of the columns and rows and diagonals each add up to 111. And if you add all the columns or the rows, you get 666. So it's kind of like as you say, the number of the sun is solar, and so these encodings are very.
The church had to demonize.
Yeah, and so some people say they're Masonic, and certainly the Freemasons have a connection to all these mysteries because they're talking about them. But again, this is more of the mound building termites.
Right. No, it's more.
How could you locate
Yeah.
these things in such a way that encodes it so perfectly. It's just not going to be happening.
Mhm.
Yeah, and yet there it is. So
well, that's so amazing on LA,
yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
there's
Sunset, they named it Sunset, and it goes to agate. Oh, it's also.
yeah. Yeah, LA is like a lot of cities. It has a lot going on that is right there in plain sight, but usually unperceived, right? And I think that actually becoming aware of these amazing patterns enhances one's appreciation for the city, for
Right.
what's there.
Well, I've been working on the feng shui of LA, and it's so interesting that the first street was Figueroa, and it went from Eagle Rock all the way down to San Pedro. And Figueroa, when I looked it up in Latin, means the spine. And so it was like the first street and the longest street in America. And then, so I've been doing everything with the LA River and the Arroyo Seco, how they come together like in a ostrich pose, and how the Arroyo Seco was like right at NASA, and there's Devil's Gate there. And then you go all the way down to San Pedro, there's Heaven's Gate is the lighthouse. It's like that same kind of, like, yeah. Oh my God, it's just amazing. Like when you discover that stuff.
Yeah, and part of my childhood, I grew up in Orange County. So down in Laguna Niguel and San Juan Capistrano and Corona del Mar area. And when I learned to drive a car, a stick shift, I learned to drive in this old government building that had been there since before I was born, that was very sparsely used, it seemed. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and everyone called it the ziggurat. And it turns out, well, since that time, when I was, I'm 51 years old. So since that time, a whole like town has grown up around the ziggurat. And so it's not like what it was when I was there. But that was designed, that building is a 7-step ziggurat that was designed by William Pereira, who was the same architect who did the Transamerica Pyramid.
Wow.
And that complex has the IRS and the Homeland Security in it. And it's fascinating, but it's at 33 degrees, 33 minutes, and 33 seconds north.
And that was so planned. That building was so placed there.
It seems like it, yeah. But then I look at I was looking at one point through my old documents that I've retained since, being in high school. And I went to high school in Dana Point, which is real close to that. And the address of my high school is 33333 Golden Lantern. And I'm just like, wow, what are the chances,
Well, I'm just mind blowing. In Orange County, they have a ziggurat.
Yeah, they do.
And the whole concept, and all of the numerology and all of that, it's amazing.
Yeah, and so there's clearly a resonance with the repetitive digits, and I think that's why a lot of, like, if you were an architect and you're designing a building on a street and you have a choice to work with the city planning to come up with, should the address be 331 or 333? Anybody? And everyone's going to say it's got to be 333. It's better.
Right.
Somehow. It's more resonant. And so I think that's just a natural thing that people preferably choose rep digits when they're available.
So if you had any place to look, where else did you find just like things you just couldn't believe?
Oh, like all over the world, right? Yeah. The thing I was mentioning in Paris and in Chicago, those parks that have the same kind of 5x12 rectangle, which that decomposes into 2, 5, 12, 13 triangles, by the way, Pythagorean triangles. But that same geometry is in the geometry of the old city of Jerusalem. And I think it was Richard Heath and John Michel wrote a book about that. And Robin Heath, Richard's brother, might have been involved in that as well. And they decoded the sacred geometry of Jerusalem to be based on a 512 rectangle.
Wow.
And what they did is they drew these X's inside of it, 2 X's. So with a proportion of 6 to 5, and then again, 6 to 5 on the other side. And those X's each mark like the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, where the X marks the spot, it's right there. And on the other X, it marks Calvary Golgotha, where Christ was crucified. And and just steps away arose from the dead in the cave and so on. And so like the most sacred places in Judaism and Christianity are pointed out by the sacred geometry of the city, and that was replicated in Paris.
What book is that in?
What book is that in?
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of it.
I'll have to look it up. I have some John Michel books, but I never read that. Yeah.
Yeah, that one is, there's 2 different books that I was sourcing for that.
I'll look it up with the,
Yeah, and then so that New Jerusalem was kind of replicated in Paris, in the gardens there. And then that was replicated again in Chicago's Grant Park, right? And then it was again in Central Park in New York City. It's like 2 5x12 rectangles edge to edge. So it's really a 5x24 rectangle. Or another thing that follows that is the dollar bill has a proportion of 5:12. So it's like you could lay $2 bills down or two $200 bills down.
Yeah.
And that would represent the proportions of Central Park. But it's all like going back to Jerusalem in some way, and it's not just Jerusalem. It's a lot of sacred places have this. It goes all the way back to Stonehenge, in fact. So Stonehenge has these station stones, 4 of them, and they're in a 5x12 proportion, and so it's not just a thing from Judaism or Christianity, but it actually predates that by millennia.
Yeah. And
it's actually a transcendent thing that is beyond human culture because it's based on a Pythagorean triangle, which is a universal.
Right.
And so that's where these things, a lot of people get off the bus and they'll say, well, it's all a Jewish space laser conspiracy of, okay, well, that's one perspective, but it's also a Christian one. Right. And it's also a pagan one. And it's also something that would be true even for aliens on other planets, because it's using geometry that we can all understand and agree on.
Just like the pyramid on Mars.
Yeah, and so that's where it goes beyond the first explanations that people come up with usually are conspiratorial.
Right.
But then when you look deeper and you keep going down that road that we were talking about, if you just keep going down your road, whatever road you're on, you're going to get to the good stuff, eventually. And I think that's what I've done in my research is I just keep going down the rabbit hole,
These relationships are just like mind-boggling. You know what I mean? When you really just sit and think about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what it's all about, is trying to get people to think more deeply in new ways, take new perspectives. I think that's very healthy, to look at things in new ways and start to have this sense of wonder, and I think a lot of times we're missing that in our daily lives. We're just going about with this feeling of certainty that we know we're right.
Right.
Actually, the reality is so much vaster than we can even ever appreciate. So if you're able to open up, you're going to be able to see and perceive a lot more of these so-called secrets in plain sight that are all around you. And you're going to be transformed by that.
Do you find Mount Ararat at all? Like, have you done anything about Mount Ararat, like in any alignments?
Mount Ararat, you mean?
Yeah,
where Noah supposedly had the ark?
Because for ages, you couldn't fly over it. It was a no-fly zone. So I was just wondering if you had
I did write a blog article about that at one time.
Oh, okay.
And I remember there's a UN outpost up on Mount Hermon, which is nearby that, I think.
Oh, okay.
Mount Ararat might be in another location. I might be confusing that. I think there's a geomantic triangle there. Yeah, I have a blog post called Geomantic Triangles that connects that with, I think, Delphi and Thebes. And they're kind of forming this equilateral triangle or something. Yeah, I'd have to look that up, but
okay, I just wondered on that one if you'd had that.
Yeah, it's on my esoteric radar scope.
Yeah. So now when you look at Washington, D.C., do you have anything that you align with that?
Well, Washington,
because it has so much sacred geometry. And
Well, the city itself is full of amazing encodings and geometries. And
Yeah.
it's also kind of on an alignment that this guy, Jim Allison, found with great circles. And if you draw this great circle like Boston, New York, DC, Mexico City, there's a whole bunch of things on that line. You know, it's fascinating that
Mhm.
you could draw this one line around the world, a great circle, and so many important locations are on it.
Mhm.
You know, that's where you start to wonder, like, what's going on with that? Like,
Right.
it's more than three. It's many that align with that. Yeah, I don't know if there's a deeper
I
thing.
remember being in Washington, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and they were moving, there was a statue of Lincoln in that park, not the Lincoln Memorial, but there's another statue, and they were moving it off of the alignment. It was kind of interesting because we were going, wow, what's that going to do? And they had brought in this guy that was the only one that knew how to work with these old monuments and repair that, you know, I mean, he really didn't want to be moving it. It was interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was in the power spot already, you know, and I don't know. And why were they moving it? Was it some political thing or some other reason?
I know it was like, who knows, but I just thought it just like would put it off kilter, you know?
Yeah, I am aware that they're taking down like statues of Thomas Jefferson and a lot of these figures from the past because of their dubious nature today. When we look back at them, we're like, well, he did some good things, but he also held slaves. You know,
Right.
it wasn't cool. So
Mhm.
I'm sympathetic to, let's get rid of that. If that offends people, let's
Right.
take it away. But I don't want to erase history. I don't think that's a good thing, to pretend it didn't happen.
No,
we
because
need
I
to
think
remember
it just kind of reminds you, yes.
Yeah.
We need reminders.
Yeah, but they don't need to be in your face every day.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
come on, we can read about it in a book if you want to do that.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
yeah.
It always reminds me of the Muslim thing where they don't make any those kind of statues. Or, you know, I was teaching an art class and I had these Muslim students and they couldn't do any art that had eyes.
Yeah, there's a
That's the whole thing.
prohibition.
So I just thought, you know, we're sort of like going back to that, getting rid of some of these statues. It's you know, it's interesting.
Well, it's interesting in Islam, they don't want to ever depict people or eyes.
Mhm.
And what did they do instead? Well, they got really into geometry. They're
Right.
like master geometers, and they have incredible tiling patterns and geometric decorations. In fact, the thing behind me here is based on that kind of
Oh,
exploration
beautiful.
of geometry. And so
Mhm.
that is, if we go that direction in the West, that might be really fruitful.
Yeah, be so healthy. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there, you know, sometimes there's a force behind this whole thing of removing the statues and, you know, going in another direction.
Yeah.
I always thought about in Turkey, there's a place that the one mosque that's a beehive mosque built on the beehive, and then the whole city of the all the houses are built like beehive structure.
Yeah,
So
the beehive is a real secret there in plain sight with the hexagonal structure. You know, that's the most efficient way to build your wax with the least material and the most strength. Ends up being this pure geometry, right? It reminds me of the hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn that they found back in the Voyager days. I think they photographed it then, and then they did with the Cassini spacecraft. They got better images. It's in the hexagon pattern is still there.
Wow.
And it's a pure geometry that exists in the moving cloud. The moving gases of the planet are always swirling around, and yet there's this persistent hexagon that's there. And it's like, why? We don't understand like why that's happening. But I think it's beautiful that the geometry is kind of asserting itself, you know, out of this chaos, the chaos of the swirling clouds. And yet somehow they all the clouds form this hexagonal pattern. And it's like order comes out of the chaos. It's actually, the chaos is actually in the order, or the order is under the chaos.
Yeah.
And they're in this dance together, you know, to bring forth the manifestation.
And that's sort of how, like when you were starting about creation and how it's all happening like that, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely this kind of balancing act, this kind of the two sides of the thing. And you know, right before we started talking, you were mentioning you have this picture of the what did you call it? The two snakes with, and one has a compass.
Yeah, so it's like two snakes. It's like the you know, Ida and Pingala. It's like they're like this, and then one goes female, one goes male, and then the female one is Nua, and the other one is Fuxi, Fuxi, and she has a square, like, and he's got a compass. You know, they're geometers, and it was found thousands of years ago in a cave in China.
Yeah, and I think we would do well as a modern people to recognize these ancient discoveries aren't just some kind of quaint misunderstanding these primitive people had about geometry, but actually our top minds today are coming with physics and so on, are realizing that it all is geometry, that
right, it's really coming
ancients
around
were actually right. And if we were going to make an emblem like that now, that would be probably the best one. Of pointing out that underlying everything is geometry.
Right.
So I think
I had it as my background, but it was too much happening.
Yeah.
So, you know, as we get over here going towards the end of stuff, can you talk about your website? You've got such a great website, and you have classes and you have videos, and what's all happening over there.
Yeah, so my website is sacredgeometryacademy.com. And there you'll find pre-recorded courses as well as live courses and workshops and one-day intensives or workshops that go over a whole month. We have a variety of different offerings to bring people into the experiencing of geometry in a personal way so that you can get the feeling of why people call it sacred geometry. You know, because what we're doing is we're using geometry for its qualitative use, which is the feeling of the geometry as you draw it. And it's not the quantitative use of like analyzing the theorems of geometry or anything like that. That's a different tack. It is always, it's the same geometry. And it's fascinating to me as a side note that geometry has this in it, this rationality, kind of left-brained side. And it also has the right-brained kind of appreciation of it. That doesn't, you don't require the kind of logical thinking, but rather just the experiencing of it. And so that's what we're offering through the Sacred Geometry Academy, is this powerful, transformative inner work that you can go on and experience by using geometry as the vehicle to get you there. And so I invite everyone to come and check out sacredgeometryacademy.com, see what we have there.
So I went and like checked it out, and just for years, I'm so into the geometry and looking at this and that. But then I realized I never did any drawing of it. I know all about it, talking about it, doing it, but like that's when you really grow the synapses and stuff, when you're
exactly
doing that ordered.
Yeah, it's one thing to know it in your head.
Yeah.
And it's another to ground it in your body in the act of drawing. And that's why we advocate people draw with a pencil and a ruler and a compass on paper. It seems like such an anachronism today, right? But that's what we're asking people to do, because that act involves your body. It involves your, you know, your whole, like you got to lean over the paper, you got to use your arm, you have to focus your eyes, and it's this whole kind of performance art in a way that you're doing whenever you make a drawing. And it involves you more as a whole person than just learning about it in your head. Right. Because it has a potential to really move not only your mind, but also your heart, and actually transform your soul by this experience. So it's a real holistic type of balancing act that we try to give you.
Right. That's why I realized doing the Flower of Life, which was my first one, and then doing my meditation with this class I've done with this people forever. Like when we would do the silent Om, it went out in the flower of life patterns to everybody that was meditating. It was so, it went to different dimensions by just starting to do the drawing and stuff.
Yeah, it's wonderful how this vehicle of geometry connects people. And it ripples out, when we do this, we get kind of in harmony with as above, so below. We kind of get in tune with the whole work of the cosmos. If it's all based on geometry, then we ought to probably do geometry a little bit.
And that's a good way to end this talk. This was so great, and you've got such insight. And everybody go back and watch these secrets in plain sight, because even if you've seen them before, like when you see them again, you're just like, it's just amazing what Scott has discovered. And also visit his website and like start drawing and get some calipers, like, so you can start measuring. So, okay, Scott, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Carol, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see everybody like next week. Bye. Oh, so let me.